Tonight's going to be amazing. Let's just say this, trip through Revelation Lane. And Tom, God bless you, and thank you for the work you're doing. And I think it's important to start out, Doug and Joe, with Tom, and because the bottom line is Tom and Chris Putnam have been in contact with some of the leading Vatican astronomers, thinkers, theologians, and I think it's good to let Tom set the baseline for tonight's discussion, because we're going to be talking about the aliens that are coming to be the saviors of mankind and humanity. And Tom and I have both written parallel concerning that for the past 15, 20 years. So independent of each other, God has knitted a framework and a tapestry of ever-increasing revelation. And by the grace of God tonight, I pray that people see the big picture. Tom, go ahead and take it and share what it is that is coming upon, the earth.
Hey, Steve, great to be on with you again, and also Doug and Joe, thank you for having me on Quayle. My first time to be on your show, and I'm very excited about it, and I'm humbled to be on. All right, well, Steve, Doug, Joe, as probably at least the three of you know, and by the way, Steve, I blame you for all this. This is your fault, you know.
Well, I will take the blame because obviously it was starting this whole thing off, and with the aliens and fallen angels, sexual corruption of the human race, I think that most people thought I was probably from another planet, but now they're coming to find out through your efforts that exactly what we're talking about is the biggest news behind the scenes. Is it not, Tom?
Well, yeah, and what we found out, the reason I say we blame you is because, you know, a year ago we did a show with you when we released the book Petrus Romanus. We were talking about the prophecy of the popes. And when we did that show, it became the #1 blog talk radio show in the world for 1 week. But then about 4 weeks later, you had me come back on, and we talked about the Vatican ET connection, which was really kind of just like an add-on conversation, right? And yet that show became the #1 blog talk radio show in the world for over a month and stayed in the top 10 for several months. And what it did was it illustrated to Chris Putnam and I that the world is very interested and maybe even can identify more with the idea of the Vatican's interest in extraterrestrial intelligence and even the idea of an alien savior. Maybe they identify with that more than what was more a complicated conversation around the prophecy of the popes. And so your fault that we found out that the world was interested in that, but we couldn't have known where it was going to take us. And the very first thing that we decided we needed to do was to try to arrange, and we did, through the Arizona State University, an opportunity to be able to go to Mount Graham, because you can't go there unless you're invited to go there. And in fact, you can't get up on the top of the mountain unless you go there with a guard who has a key to the gate, and they get you up there. And anyway, if people want to read about that, they can read about this new Exo Vaticana series. It's being published right now by Paul over at newswithviews.com. In fact, he has a new part to the series that's over there tonight. I'd encourage people to go over there and read. They'll also be able to find out more about the ongoing investigation in the weeks to come at RaidersNewsUpdate.com. And I promise all will be revealed as we go along. We're actually doing something a little different this time, Steve, in that last time our investigation was finished when we did the radio show. This is almost kind of like right in the middle. We're still waiting on documents. So we've got documents that we're supposed to receive the first week of next month that's going to verify some of the material that we're looking at right now. But anyway, the bottom line is the Exo Vaticana, there'll be a new part up again on Tuesday, and that will just keep happening. We've been invited all over the world, including, by surprise, Italian media wanted us to come over to Italy and talk to them about both Exo Vaticana and Petrus Romanus, which we declined for security reasons. You know what I mean, Steve?
Oh, that was a very wise decision.
Yeah.
That's kind of like Tom being invited into the stew pot by a cannibal who promises a tasty meal. Unfortunately, it's you.
Yeah, and we decided that we were probably not Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, so we decided to pass on the invitation. But anyway, we went to Mount Graham, southeastern Arizona, to start the investigation, and primarily why we went there. We learned a lot more than what we went there to learn, which was really kind of an exciting surprise. But we went there in particular to ask about the projects and the observers that are approved to operate VAT, the Vatican Astronomical Technology Telescope. We got the Jesuit father who was on duty that day on film, And that material will be talked about a little bit later, but we'll hint at a lot of it tonight. But basically what we learned was the most important research occurring on top of Mount Graham, including the Vatican's astronomers, is the quest, not just to pinpoint extrasolar planets, but certain extrasolar planets and advanced alien intelligence. Now, first, I should start by explaining, because there's a couple of things that seems like the public is a little bit confused about. So let me explain. First of all, on Mount Graham, you have the Mount Graham International Observatory Community. This consists of 3 telescopes. Number one is the Large Binocular Telescope. That's an optical telescope, the LBT. It's one of the most advanced systems in the world, and people from all over the world compete for time and opportunity to be able to use that telescope. In between it and that is the submillimeter telescope, which is a radio telescope that observes in the submillimeter wavelength range. And then last but not least, the reason we went to Mount Graham is the Vatican Advanced Technology Telescope, or VAT. Now, because there's been some confusion, there's something that I need to make clear for listeners. First of all, the Lucifer device is a device that is inside the Large Binocular Telescope. It's mounted between the focal points of the LBT's 2 giant, almost 30-foot diameter telescope mirrors. The Lucifer instrument observes in the near-infrared wavelength range, which is important for reasons we can discuss in a moment. It detects objects that are too far away or faint to be observed by regular telescopes, or also to be even observed in visible light, what our eyes would see, like distant planets and so on. It has longer wavelengths than visible light. It means it can pass through astronomical gas, dust without being scattered, and that sort of thing. So in other words, objects that are obscured from view in the visible spectrum can be viewed by using the Lucifer's infrared technology in the LBT. For example, you know how UFO researchers have fascinated for a long time how infrared technology can be used to spot and track unidentified flying objects in the heavens, right? Stuff that can't be seen with other telescopes or the naked eye. In fact, if people want to Google or YouTube, some of the most astonishing UFOs that have ever been caught on film and tracked were caught with infrared technology. But on the connection between the Vatican astronomers and the Lucifer device, this is where stuff kind of gets interesting. And there are several points I'd like to make just real quick if I can. First of all, there's a curious description on the Vatican Observatory website concerning the Lucifer device, and it's under this heading on their website. It says, quote, NASA and the Vatican's infrared telescope called Lucifer, a German-built, NASA and the Vatican-owned and funded infrared telescope for looking at Nibiru nemesis, end quote. And why the Vatican Observatory website has allowed that caption to remain on their site is curious because, as you know, Nibiru and Nemesis, these are planets that return in orbit close to the Earth after very long periods of time. These might be something that can't be seen in the visible spectrum, but perhaps can be seen in infrared. These are planetoids that have been connected in modern myth with Planet X and so on, but more darkly with the destruction of planets that some believe occurred during a great war between God and Lucifer when the powerful angel was cast out of heaven. In the book of Job, where the prophet details how God destroyed the literal dwelling places of the angels that made insurrection against him, Job 26, people can read about that. It specifically mentions there the destruction of Rahab, which is a planetary body that was also known as Pride in ancient times. And in Job it says, from which God drove the fugitive snake. So the question is, and this is part of our investigation, and this is a big question, is Rome and other world powers using the Lucifer device to observe something that the rest of us are unaware of, something that they believe represents this ancient war, or maybe something else, keeping an eye on approaching, what, angelic transportation devices, UFOs, something that, remember Father Malachi Martin hinting at that? And then there's another point that I should make here very quickly, and I'm trying not to hog the time here, but these are really important points based on the feedback
hey, Tom,
we've been getting.
take the time, because, again, this is critical that you lay this out, because this is just preparatory, so don't be worried about passing the mic to me, because I'll chime in the second or third hour, but lay out everything you need to lay out, because what people have got to understand real quick is that there is an expectation that the alien saviors are coming. They've openly talked about it, and they've openly planned to get everybody ready to accept the intergalactic Messiah. So just take it away and don't be worried about turning the mic over to me.
Well, and Mr. Horn, let me jump in here just for a second here. We've got a couple of people just asking if you can adjust your mic, perhaps maybe talk a little bit louder or put it closer to your mouth. I'm not sure if you got a volume control there or not.
Yeah. Oh, is that better?
We don't want to miss a word. It should be. Go ahead.
I'll try to speak up. There's another thing here that I should say that's very important at the outset. The Jesuits at VAT, and we've gotten feedback from some of the Jesuits even since we launched the Vaticana series, even though the information we got was from the astronomers at VAT, and since that time with Guy Cosmonalgo, who's one of the top leading Vatican astronomers, who has done several exchanges with us in interview. He too has said that the world is soon going to look to aliens for their salvation. So it's not like this is a hidden secret, and we're not getting this information third hand and fourth hand. We're getting it right from the astronomer's mouth. But the Jesuits at VAT, one thing that they've been saying publicly, and it needs to be kind of clarified, is that they will deny any part in the naming of that infernal Lucifer instrument at the Large Binocular Telescope next door. Now, we give them that they themselves didn't name it, but what they don't point out is how they have access to using it, plus they are an integral part of the whole complex at Mount Graham International Observatory, and as such, they are connected to the very consortium, the German astronomers, that did name Lucifer. And by the way, this is not something I'm yet prepared to talk about. Chris Putnam's doing the investigation on this, but the German consortium are also part of the odious Max Planck Institute, and if that rings a bell with you, Steve, it's because that's the group that gave assistance to the murderous experiments of Nazi scientist Dr. Mengele in the 1940s. But that's
Absolutely.
a different part. That's a different part, and I'm not yet qualified to talk about that, but that is part of this investigation. Now, in our interview with Vatican astronomer Guy Cosmonalgo, he indicated that the VORG, that's the Vatican Observatory Research Group, now have a new Jesuit point man in the search for alien planets that has access to the use of Lucifer. He told us, I'm just going to quote what he said, quote, "As it happens, one of us, Father Paul Gabor, just finished his PhD thesis work at the Paris Observatory on designing an instrument for a proposed European Space Agency spacecraft mission to search for exoplanets. But his work was in optics, not biology, so he has just moved to Tucson and is developing collaborations with those at the University of Arizona," end quote. So, based on Cosmonalgo's statement to us, the VORG have a well-placed insider in the Large Binocular Telescope through their association with the University of Arizona, and therefore also have an ongoing use of Lucifer. So sometimes people will talk in circles because if I was a Jesuit, I, too, wouldn't want the public connecting me to an instrument called Lucifer that's being used to look at something the rest of the world can't see. But it's a little disingenuous to say we're not part of it because we didn't name it, when, in fact, you're part of the same consortium in the Mount Graham Observatory community. So I just wanted to make that point very quickly. Now, there's some other very important points before we get out of this first part of this show. This is, again, being investigated by Chris Putnam, who so far has found a great deal of very important information. But the VAT facility, first of all, it was the brainchild of Jesuit George Quayle, who became the director of the Vatican Observatory in 1978. And in addition to his duties as a Jesuit, he was an adjunct professor in the University of Arizona's astronomy department. That's how he's connected with all these people. He was also associate director of the Steward University there in Arizona. He is a darling of the atheist community. He has appeared with Richard Dawkins, advocating a deistic form of Darwinism. He also promotes a radical form of pluralism, the idea that all religions lead to the same God. And you have to understand that this is part of the worldview that is behind their current interest in astrobiology. It's important because in 1980, Quayle is the one that brokered the agreement between the University of Arizona and the Vatican, where Rome would pay a fee so that members of the Vatican Observatory Research Group could use the Stewart Observatory at the University of Arizona. So they have this symbiotic relationship with the university where what can I call them, the seminal allies in forming the international consortium that oversees Mount Graham not only includes Catholic institutions like Notre Dame University, a very large group of Italian observatories, and also the Max Planck Institute of West Germany. But this influential conglomerate is, and this is the part to just remember, consists of these partners: the Vatican, the United States, Italy, and Germany. So when we were at the Large Binocular Telescope, I even asked one of the instrument engineers that was explaining how Lucifer works to us if the Vatican, or if its astronomers, could make use of Lucifer, or did they make use of Lucifer? And since he wasn't the one that organizes who uses it, he wasn't exactly sure, but he simply repeated the fact that any of the astronomers there, if they make application to get time, certainly could be using it, and since they're in that community, they do. So now, one other fast thing. I realize I'm kind of jumping around here, but there were some points that I wanted that are based on feedback we've been getting via email that I wanted to answer real fast. And finally, the question that came in was, why was the VAT even organized? I mean, what is the purpose, and why was Mount Graham chosen as the location? And so very quickly, that went into operation. At the time it went into operation, the media was asking the same question, because, you know, there was a lot of Indians in the community there. They were forming lawsuits, all kinds of things to try to stop the construction of these telescopes on top of Mount Graham, and the Vatican was using some of its own political influence, twisting arms to be able to get up on the mountain. And so the press was asking why the Vatican wanted to be up there, and what would that be dedicated to doing? What was its purpose? And Quayle made a very startling revelation when he spoke with the press. Bruce Johnston of the London Daily Telegraph, a conservative newspaper with a good reputation, interviewed him at the time. And here is what he reported October 28, 1992, in an article titled "Vatican Sets Evangelical Sights on Outer Space." Here's what Quayle said, quote, "The Roman Catholic Church is to team up with America's space agency to look for life in outer space and so spread the gospel to extraterrestrials. Jesuit priests who run the Vatican Observatory near Rome say they are joining forces with the U.S. NASA agency to hunt for UFOs and signs of life on planets in solar systems similar to Earth's. NASA's job will be to monitor the alien communication signals. The Vatican, which has helped to build a new reflector telescope in Tucson, Arizona, will search for planets displaying the conditions for life," end quote. So now we know what that was built for and what it was supposed to do, and ultimately this raises some very serious questions that we can talk about tonight, and that we are busy right now nailing down the actual documentation for the book Exo Vaticana. And there's some startling stuff that comes up here. Is the sky island known as Mount Graham, as strange as the question might sound, is it the location of a dimensional portal? Is it why they chose it? In other words, why Mount Graham? And when you look at what the Indians believe about that area, there's some shocking stuff, actually, Steve, that has to do with ancient giants that were in that
Absolutely.
Territory.
Absolutely. And Tom, just let me interrupt you real quick. Just so you know, we haven't talked except exchanged email links, but I am so focused on that area and the Native American traditions, and in the process, I won't say how I'm doing it, but interviewing Native Americans, some of the eldest living Native Americans, and what they have to say. By the way, that whole area, I'll say it, make it easy. That is one of the many stargates, and it's amazing to me how now the Native Americans and their, obviously, the giants fit into this, and the giants come through the gate. And isn't it interesting that you said on one of the shows we did several years ago, on a specific date, there would be a giant seen, and lo and behold, they were seen in Uffington, England, at the CERN, not the CERN that the particle accelerator, but at where the giant chalk figure. That very place is where the giants, the multiple policemen saw it. And now, isn't it strange? We haven't talked, and that's where my whole area of focus is personally, is on the stargates of the desert Southwest, the legends, myths, and the extraterrestrial visitation to those specific tribes. Now, that's amazing to me. And again, ladies and gentlemen, when Tom and I go on together, we just are kind of blown away by how the Lord is leading us separate and distinct, but bringing it into focus so the parts that we each have can form a complete picture. So isn't that fascinating that I'd be involved with the Mescalero Apaches and others, and their legends, and now you're talking about Mount Graham and the significance of it and why it was chosen. By the way, at one point, one of those routes in that area, one of the highways was known as Route 666, the Devil's Highway.
Yeah, that was the highway that was actually changed. That's the highway that you have to take in order to get to Mount Graham.
Right. Isn't that fascinating? Why would it be called, the Devil's Highway, Route 666? It was changed, Lucifer. And you said something I think I just got to stop you on real quick. The whole technology being run through the Germans and the whole tie there, and I know this is going to sound amazing to a lot of people, but it goes back to the Antarctic and New Schwabenland and the Nazi technological joint venture with aliens, and I'm not talking illegals here, and it's fascinating that you're in Arizona. Antarctica has come into the focus of a lot of concern because of all the nations building telescopes there. So the tie is like a cerebral cortex and all the neurons and axons tying and coming together. And I think this is the time of Daniel that God spoke about to his servant Daniel, that the gates are not only be opened, as you have been talking about in the Armon Gate, and we talked about years ago, but now the knowledge that's increasing. Unfortunately, all knowledge isn't good, because with much knowledge comes much sorrow. So the fact that you are at one of those Stargate portals, and one of the most renowned, I think, is just mind-blowing, and the connections of all what we would call esoteric, psychic, and occultic powers are, pun intended, focusing their eyes in the infrared spectrum on who's coming. What is Lucifer? He's a light bringer.
Right. And
continue, sir.
It's just only a coincidence, right, that they named that instrument Lucifer?
Yeah.
You mentioned I said that tongue in cheek, by the way. You mentioned CERN, and you and I talked some years ago how at CERN their own top physicists were saying that something might come through a dimensional door at the Large Collider. Did you see the news story this week where they were talking about how 2012 was a big year in science, but 2013 is going to be even bigger? And when you read the article, we have it linked, I think, at Raiders News Update today. When you read the article, what they're talking about is how next month in February, CERN is going to be closed down, it's going to be shut down for 24 months for a very specific reason, and that's so that they can supercharge it. Why? According to CERN, they're going to supercharge it because in 2015 they hope to be able to open portals and find out if there are other dimensions, and the language in the article says they want to know if there are other realities there and people inside these other dimensions, or not necessarily extraterrestrial, but intelligence inside these other dimensions. So, and 2015, of course, is also very important. Let me say something about these mountains while it's still, part of our conversation. Mountains, first of all, universally are associated with deities and spirits. That's even true in the Bible. But history suggests that part of the reason that the native people there considered Mount Graham to be holy involved several things. One was unusual heavenly activity there in ancient times when UFOs that were called spirit lights moved through the sky around that mountain, something that even contributed to the local Indians their attribution of powers to the solar system and natural phenomenon. The base of the mountain hosts the St. Paul Paisius Orthodox Monastery, which is a women's community that's dedicated to intercession for the alleged Marian phenomenon. Now, as evangelical Christians, we don't accept Marian dogma. Our position, I think, at least for some of us, is that so-called Marian apparitions are really more akin to UFO phenomenon anyway, and that's a position that's supported even by some Catholic scholars, including the pro-Catholic scientists at the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics, Dr. Nelson Pacheco. I don't know if you read his out-of-print book, Unmasking the Enemy. I can send it to you. But he warns the Vatican. He's a pro-Catholic. He's respected by them, and he warns the Vatican that many Marian apparitions are actually identical to deceptive UFO manifestations, and that they need to be careful in the way they interpret them. Another thing regarding Mount Graham. And I mentioned this a moment ago, the giants. We've learned that the San Carlos Apache, they have an ancient tale. Maybe you already know about this, Steve, but probably most of the listeners wouldn't, concerning a race of giants that were known as the Giandupids, if I'm saying that correctly. And they were judged and destroyed by the Great Father. Now, the Phoenix metropolitan area, which is basically where I grew up, that covers Maricopa County and Pinal counties, but it's often referred to as the Valley of the Sun. Know why? Because according to the legend, there was a race of Indians called the Tartums, and they lived in the valley. They were peaceful farmers. They prospered, and then one day they were invaded by these Jindupids, which are described as Goliaths. They used tree limbs for toothpicks. And these Nephilim were led by a massive man named Ibilkin, that allegedly came from the northeast and were headed south to their home beyond the Gulf of Baja. And these giants nearly wiped out the Tartums before they hid themselves underground in the mountains. And that was when the Father or the Son, according to Indian legend, threw this huge fireball that seared the monstrous Nephilim into the scorched mountain rock. Now, elements, of course, of the Indian tale are obviously mythologized in the modern version by the Indians, but the original story has remarkable thematic coherence to Genesis chapter 6. Another thing we learned about this mountain is that it is central to the Apache creation myth, and it tells of the one who lives above and who descended in a flying disc at the start of creation, right? And so in their creation myth, they talk about how nothing existed, no earth, no sky, only darkness everywhere. But then suddenly from the darkness emerged this disc, and on one side of it was yellow, the other side was white. It's suspended in midair, and within the disc sat a bearded man, the creator, the one who lives above. And so all of that mountain range is associated with supernatural gateways and openings and UFO phenomenon. And the gateways that are there, I can't even say the Indian name. It's Chinaitih, Chinateh, or something like that. But it means a gateway. There's a gateway that is there, a portal, and spirit beings can come back and forth through this portal. And the other things, there's just so much here that's interesting about this. Maybe I shouldn't get hung up on it, but
no, this is critical. This is critical, Tom. This is not hung up. This is critical.
Well, they talk about the owl, right? Now,
yeah,
to the Apache Indian, the owl, and dreaming of this owl would signify maybe approaching death or departure or abduction. The Hopis called him Koko, the watcher of the dark, and the god of the dead, and the god of the underground, the god that would go down into this portal. All of it's fascinating, given when you look at what we call modern abduction phenomenon that also involves discs and flying geniuses. Oh, another part of the Indian folklore was this dragon that appears that can talk like a man and tries to make deals with the Indian tribes in exchange for, guess what? They're women, right? But how much all of this is connected with the alien abduction accounts, even where the owl is a disguise, wherein the abductee is led to believe that the bug-eyed alien in their memory was actually an owl that they had seen somewhere and had it lodged in their memory. But owls have been associated in Christian history with sorcery, flying witches, and anyway, so many legends that seem to mirror abduction phenomenon, the collecting of human and animal genetic material, dragons trying to make deals with mankind, portals, through which these supernatural creations can move. Well, anyway, this the more you study about Mount Graham, the more you find that supernatural gateways are tied to the mountain range, and they were a long time before the Vatican cast its eyes on Mount Graham, and yet their whole reason for building the Vatican Astronomical Technology Telescope seems to correspond to the legends that were upon that mountain.
Well, and let me throw something in too, Doug, and I got your message. I actually am muting when I'm off the air, just so you know. I keep hearing a bunch of noise in the background too, but listen, the thing is that it's critical that people